Hello, everyone. We are just going to take a few minutes for everyone to join the virtual room with us, and we'll get it kicked off in just a minute or two as people trickle in. Hello and welcome. It's about 7:01, so I'm sure we're going to have some folks trickle in. But we want to go ahead and be mindful of those that have joined us and your time. We're so grateful, thankful that you took an hour out of your Wednesday evening to spend it with us at Skyland Trail to talk a little bit more about your student, your child, um, and maybe your client. But I am Shelby Gutenberger, and I am one of the National Referral Relations representatives at Skyland Trail. I may know some of you that have joined our virtual room tonight. Welcome, welcome. I am just going to kick us off by introducing kind of Skyline Trail as a program as a whole. Um, we are a nationally recognized, we're actually a nonprofit for those of you that didn't know that. We're a mental health treatment organization, nonprofit. And we specialize in treating adults and adolescents, and those individuals that may be suffering with a primary psychiatric diagnosis. And we have residential and day treatment programs here in Atlanta. We also support individuals too that are in recovery from a co-occurring substance use disorder as well. So we're going to focus really on our adolescent program tonight, but just quickly, a quick overview on our adult program. Our main adult campus is located over on North Druid Hills Road and Buford Highway in Brookhaven. Our adult programs has four evidence-based psychiatric recovery teams: CBT, DBT, Cognition in First Episode, that's our psychosis recovery team, and social integration. And then dual diagnosis, as I mentioned, the co-occurring is offered as a co-focus area. So almost like having a double major at Skyland Trail. Tonight, we're going to focus on our adolescent population, and we treat teens that are 14 to 17 who have a primary mood or anxiety disorder. They may also have a history of self-harm. And also, we treat primary trauma. So any 14 to 17-year-old that may have a PTSD diagnosis, or maybe that's something we uncover while they're in treatment with us. We also work with adolescents that have a secondary mild to moderate substance use. And our adolescent program has two specific tracks, CBT and DBT, modeled after our adult campus. Our clients can admit, adolescent or adults can admit directly into our day treatment program or come in at the residential level, really depending on their level of care, what they need, what is most clinically appropriate for them. Um, some people are really excited to hear that we actually do take insurance. So we are a network with most private insurances, TRICARE East, Oscar is one I like to mention. And then we just most recently went in network with Kaiser, which is a big deal because Kaiser isn't always hasn't always traditionally had great coverage for mental health. So we're so excited to be partnered with them. And as a nonprofit, we also offer need-based financial assistance, which is amazing. So we encourage all families to look into our financial aid program as well. And of course, you can find out more information about Skyline on our website. Please or ask questions. We've got the chat open here, so ask questions throughout the presentation. But at this point, I'm going to turn it over to our Director of Education, Molly Mercer Dedman, and she is going to introduce our speakers for the evening. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Shelby, and welcome everybody. Thank you all so much for taking some time to learn about ways to support your teen's mental well-being. It is my pleasure to introduce our speakers. First, I'll start with Caitlin Byrne. Caitlin is a licensed professional counselor, a certified prolonged exposure therapist, and a certified spiritual director. She is currently the assistant clinical director at the Skyland Trail Adolescent Campus. Caitlin has experience in residential and private practice mental health for adolescents and adults, treatment for co-occurring disorders, substance abuse treatment for individuals and families, and trauma-focused care. And we also have with us Caitlin Connolly. We have two Caitlins. Caitlin Connolly is a licensed clinical social worker and a certified prolonged exposure therapist and consultant. She is currently the lead director of clinical services at the Skyland Trail Adolescent Campus, and she has experience in community mental health, corrections-based mental health, trauma-focused care, treatment for co-occurring disorders, and mental health in various education settings. Again, please put your questions in the chat, and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. So I'll pass it over to Caitlin and Caitlin.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Molly and Shelby. This was a fantastic introduction, and thank you everyone for being here. As she said, I am Caitlin Connolly. We call me Caitlin with a C, and I'll hand it over to Caitlin with a K.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Caitlin with K. I'm the Assistant Clinical Director of the Adolescent Campus here, where we serve adolescents 14 to 17 years of age and provide them with the care that they need to be able to thrive and overcome some of these anxiety disorders, perfectionism, emotional regulation, the things they may need in their adolescence to just be able to grow and to thrive, as well as supporting them with integrating into community experiences and being able to work on some of those social skills that all of our adolescents are in need of. As well as, that was mentioned, we do have a lot of trauma-focused care here as well for our clients who meet that PTSD diagnosis. And so getting to work with them through prolonged exposure and being able to help them reduce their symptoms of PTSD while they're here. So we're so excited to be with you tonight, and yeah, we'll get started.
All right. So as Caitlin mentioned, a lot of our framework, our perspective is going to come from a mental health lens when we talk about how to help your students, your children succeed when it comes to academic performance, and even just kind of daily life functionality. However, a lot of these skills and ideas can be utilized with any child, whether they have mental health, pre-existing mental health challenges, or if they are just maybe struggling in school or socially in school, whatever that may be. So this is really geared towards anyone who wants to support a teenager be successful in school. But we're going to look at three main areas throughout this presentation, and hopefully you'll have some good things to take away with you in terms of practical skills, some concepts you can integrate, whether it's with your clients, your families, or even within your community groups and whatever that may be. So we're going to talk a little bit about performance pressure and perfectionism, as that is a growing area of concern with today's youth. We're going to talk a lot about what supporting personal and academic time management looks like, and coupled with that, how do we encourage motivation, accountability, and overall functionality? So looking at the whole picture of a developing teenager, adolescent, in terms of how we can encourage as most success as possible. So let's jump right into it. So first, we're going to just talk a little bit about what is going on with the youth today. What are the challenges that young people are experiencing? And the reason this is important is because when we talk about the whole system of a child, there's so many internal and external influences that these young people are facing. So much more than I know when I was a young person. When we talk about access to social media and technology, that's at everyone's fingertips. I always say that social media and technology are both a blessing and a curse because they do provide connection, they do provide access to a lot of great information, and we do see that it has a major toll on young people's motivation, as well as their engagement in school and everyday life. But beyond that, we also need to look at just the general aspect of how society, culture, public topics are impacting the development of these young people, how it's helping them shape and develop values, how it may be impacting their mental illness. When we talk about things like bullying, discrimination, or stigma, we also know that the family plays such a huge role in how our young people are developing. And so we talk about success and daily functioning. How might things in the home, like financial challenges or family relationships, being impacting these young people? We work with a lot of young people who are catching up with school. And so even that idea of perceived perfectionism or demand is really challenging for them. And so how do we help young people create goals and aspirations that are both realistic and achievable? And then finally, when we talk about substance use, this is a period of time where there are people who are starting to experiment or create connections with people that may lead them to some risky or concerning behaviors, whether that's substance use or things of that nature. So again, there's a lot going on with these young people, and we need to be mindful of how all of these different factors might be contributing to both their success as well as some of their barriers. I can't do a presentation without presenting some statistics. And this really is an important snapshot. Obviously, it's not everything. It doesn't encompass all different challenges, but we know that the adolescent developmental stage is a very vulnerable time, not only for a variety of things like puberty and the aspect of the human body growing, but also when young people are at a greater susceptibility to developing different mental health disorders. So we know that 1 in 4 teens will experience trauma. We mentioned that we do a lot of trauma work, and what it feels like, again, that may not necessarily be true, but it feels like we're just seeing more and more trauma, especially as it relates to social media, technology, and things of that nature. We know that suicide is the fourth leading cause of death in teens. It is also the most preventable form of death, and so that's something to keep in mind. Hospitalizations have increased drastically from 2016 to 2022, looking at maybe the impact of the pandemic and things of that nature. We know that there are certain populations that are also at greater risk, right? Whether that's minorities due to religious affiliation, race, ethnicity, being a part of the LGBTQ plus community, are at greater risk for both suicide and trauma. Self-harm typically starts within the adolescent range of 11 to 15, and those are things that are important to know because when we talk about effective coping strategies or even emotional dysregulation, how can we catch those things earlier rather than later to intervene, again, for the whole purpose of not only success, but general well-being and safety. We talk about 3 in 4 young people with depression also have another mental health disorder. So thinking about the aspect of comorbidity and the way that it's, oftentimes not just one thing that's going on. So having a whole picture of an adolescent is vital to their success. And then when we talk about lifetime mental illness, 50% of all lifetime mental illness begins around the age of 14. So again, such a vulnerable population who are trying to figure out themselves, their body, their life. And then there's all these extra things we have to start thinking about. So these statistics are not intended to scare anyone by any means, but it is important to look at this aspect of vulnerability and how there's also such an opportunity for intervention and prevention as a means of trying to support this population. So as we talk about school achievement, I mentioned this aspect of perceived perfection, demand, and achievement. We're seeing a lot of perfectionism. We're seeing a lot of this, even if it's perceived ideas that they need to do better, they need to perform at the best of their ability. And while we want people to be successful and have high standards or good, strong goals, we also want them to engage in a way that's most effective and productive. So when we look at this idea of, what school achievement can look like, we know that the stronger the school connectedness, the higher the grades as well as the test scores are going to be for an adolescent in high school and even middle school. We also know that as a result of school connectedness, that there is a greater consistency in attendance as well as a greater likelihood of graduating. And so we also talk about this idea of how higher grades is also, I think there's a little error in our slide right here, unfortunately, but what that's supposed to say is that higher grades is linked to more positive health and wellness behaviors, right? So when we think about this idea of both strong school connectedness and higher grades, there is a greater opportunity to have both higher physical and mental health for these young people, which then we go back to our slide, our previous slide, where we see that there's an opportunity for prevention. So when we talk about what school connectedness is, I think it's important to identify what that is, right? It's not necessarily being in every single club and being, the most popular person and having all the friends, but being connected at school means having adults and peers at school who a young person feels genuinely care about their well-being and their learning experience. So I think that's really important. Is it having one teacher or counselor who kids can go to if they're having a hard time or just need someone, a mentor to talk to? And there's also, as I mentioned before, that school connectedness is connected with an increased likelihood of graduating. However, we see that only about 61.5% of high school students in America feel connected, right? So definitely an opportunity for growth in that area for us as a nation. Again, as we talk about not only high school success, but general physical and mental well-being. So as we talk about this idea throughout this presentation of the necessity of support and things of that nature, I have this little flow chart at the bottom that kind of just outlines the impacts of what lacking support and supportive services, lacking whether it comes to family connectedness or addressing mental health challenges, can lead to potentially increased absenteeism from school, which then we know is going to decrease their school connectedness, their grades, and impact both their mental health and their physical health. So there is a lot kind of weighing on this. And we're here to say also that there's a lot of hope and there's a lot of great things we can be doing to address these concerns, the concerns that I know you all as parents and professionals are dealing with every single day. So the questions stand. How do we get teens to school, right? We know that attendance is connected to success. So how do we actually get them to school? I know a lot of me and even Caitlin and some of our colleagues are like, man, I don't remember a time in life when school was an option, right? But things are different now. And I think we have to be able to embrace those changes and acknowledge the barriers versus saying, well, when I was a kid. So that's one thing that we want to talk a little bit about in this space. How do we get teens involved in school, right? So it's not even just a matter of riding the bus, showing up to school, but how would we get them to participate in their classes and develop relationships and maybe be engaged in some sort of extracurricular activities? And then finally, how do we get teens connected with their school, their staff, as well as their peers? So that's what we're going to really dive into in this presentation today. Finally, before we kind of explore some of these aspects of skills and strategies, it's important to note that success looks different for everyone. It's important to acknowledge that getting straight A's, having a lot of friends, having perfect attendance, that's wonderful. However, do we need to reevaluate what success looks like for your children or for your child? And you may have 5 children, they may all have different areas of success that makes them feel confident and encourages them to grow. It may be aspects of getting to school every day, making a new friend, joining a club. Maybe they want to go to an Ivy League. Again, might have some different expectations of what success looks like. And so that's an important component of thinking about success in an academic setting for young people, is creating a very individualized approach.
Okay, so moving forward, talking through like how do we create a support system within our family, within our schools, within our communities in order to bolster connectivity and success and what that can look like on a lot of different levels. I love being in the residential treatment center like we are, and we have so many different aspects, of the family therapy or the psychiatry or education specialists, right? We know it takes a team and it takes a village to be able to help our young people to thrive. And so diving into those different types of support systems, what does a family support system look like? And families are defined in a lot of different ways now. But kind of thinking of this as that place where the young person goes home to each day after school, where they're sent off from to go into school. So what does that family connectivity look like? So opportunities for weekly connection. And the key point I want to emphasize here is, what does consistency look like? Our young people that we're working with, we notice like when we're able to be consistent and show up and they know what to expect, they're able to have the freedom to explore maybe their mental health disorders a little bit differently, their connectivity with their friends, when certain adults or authority or mentors are able to be consistent with that. So that's where these ideas of connectivity, weekly game nights, dinner at the table, I meet with all my clients, and one of the first things I ask is, when I'm doing an intake with them is, how often does your family eat around the dinner table? And some kids, it's every night, and some they may say, well, not really much. And it's okay if it's not every night. But is it once a week or every other week where your child knows, okay, Tuesday night is family dinner? That's where I know I'm going to get some of that connection. And yes, they may come begrudgingly to the table, but there is something in showing up and being consistent that when they really need that space, they know it's there for them. I know in my family, we have a variety of ages. So we've had to really determine what are some of those things that are across ages. And for my family, it's pickleball and mahjong, which I know are two of like the biggest things right now. But it really has spread across ages and quickly gets us all together off of our devices and back to a table together. So learning how to have like those fun conversations, make jokes, the family lore, that we all enjoy these days. And we know life is busy and it's always up and down, but that's a good thing to look at when we're looking at family support, connectivity. What does success? Is the busyness actually productive? Or, for many of our clients, we're looking at their busyness as what are you avoiding that might actually be causing more stress, more increase in mood dysregulation because you're staying so busy. The false idea of what productivity and success can look like. So different than connectivity, what does support within the family look like? How do you do regular check-ins, weekly check-ins? Do you meet at the end of the day and say, what was your rose? What was your thorn of the day? Are the cars the better time for you guys when you're driving to school or to practice? Have you thought about family therapy as an option for your family as a way to, again, that consistency and show up that we all have things we're working on. There's not our adolescent isn't the identified problem here. Learning to have those hard conversations. When any of my clients are preparing to step down from our residential care into our PHP care or even back home to their home environment, I always ask them to identify, where is the place in your home where you feel the safest that you can say, this is where we're going to go when I need to have the harder conversations. Our clients have to learn how to talk about self-harm and suicidal ideation and anxiety attacks with their family to be able to get that support system within the home, while also knowing, okay, that brings up maybe some anxiety for mom and dad too, or jumping to conclusions. So if we've identified a place in the home where those hard conversations can happen, we can be prepared that we know we're going into something harder as opposed to a casual conversation around the kitchen table. And then continual support with practicing skill usage together and how do we do self-care together. Additional support systems may look like your school support system, really developing a relationship with your child's school counselors. Maybe you're a school counselor on here right now. How are you being able to connect with parents when you're seeing a kid more often come to your office or get, maybe behavioral things throughout? Are we looking at some of those behavioral disruptions and asking, is there something co-occurring happening here? Is there a trauma? Is there a mood disorder? When maybe you have a family plan at home, can you share that with the school of, hey, this is what we're doing? Maybe you do family therapy on the outside. Do you have ROIs or individual therapists able to talk with the school counselors to really create that wide network of a support system around your child when you have all these resources and those resources and interventions, really working collaboratively to generate the interventions that will work best for your child. There are so many things out there. It's hard sometimes to know, does my child need OT? Does my child need group therapy? Do they need DBT? Do they need, individual therapy to be able to help with those things? Is there a decompression space at school? Do they have the opportunity to do that? And then maybe your child needs more specialized support. And so have you thought more about, contacting learning specialists? Do they have a 504 plan or an IEP? Do you even know that that's available at your school or not? Is there a particular way to hire some tutors from the school that they may know of certain individuals to be able to support with different learning disabilities or executive functioning and being able to help with those things? A lot of times we work very collaboratively with our kids' schools, so that they're able to keep up and manage their schoolwork while they're here with us in residential treatment as well. And oftentimes they'll ask for, what is their support plan going home? What's their safety plan as they go back home? And we can share that with the school so that they can implement those things as well when the child is back in their environment. And then finally, community support. It's really fascinating as much as we're seeing a whole bunch of different families from different environments from all over the country. But how often I do hear from our clients, like, yeah, my family doesn't really do a lot outside of our home. Maybe we go to school, but we're not really connected with, community resources or a church anymore, or Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, or these clubs, these things that we used to be involved in. And so that really is harming, like, the engagement with our community and how those activities really help someone to thrive. And what we see that as, like, community engagement is really that place of creativity in a child's life that helps them to make those life worth living goals. They're getting that exposure to all these different types of things, like theater, or maybe it's a book club at the library, or recreational sports, or playing Dungeons and Dragons, or maybe it's even a silent book club if they're a little introverted, but they're getting all these exposures to different things to help them understand, why is my life worth living? What's a purpose or a meaning? How do I discover my passions and my values? We know that adolescents and adults who suffer from depression primarily, a huge thing for them is volunteering. What is something that gets you out of yourself and connected again to a greater purpose, where depression can just want to make us really small and feel really low and just stay inside. How can we utilize some of that activation before motivation to be able to make some of these things happen? And volunteering is a huge way to do that. And there's so many, well, here in Atlanta especially, so many opportunities for that. And then encouraging a culture of connectivity, involves fun and fulfillment and creativity, and being surprised again by, wow, I didn't know I would enjoy that, but I ended up really having a good time and I made a connection with someone. We are getting this idea, our kids are getting this idea that they're so connected because of their phones, right? And they shared a laugh, but it's over in 10 seconds. It's over in 1 minute or 2 minutes, or when that Snapchat disappears. Or something else pops up that's scarier. And so those in life tangible experiences cannot be, we can't be reminiscent enough to say how important those are, that I'm sure we all know. Wanting to try to get them out of the mentality of, like, I'm alone. I'm doing this all by myself. I don't have anybody, right? So what are some ways that we can really get them connected? And yes, maybe there's some reluctancy. Maybe you've tried that and they're just like, I don't want to, I don't have the motivation. I don't care about it. And continuing that invitation, and maybe that breakthrough of them being able to say yes to that. And again, wanting to deter the perfectionism mindset by exposing them to alternative ideas, values, perspectives. There are so many ways to live in this world, and especially in the United States, for sure, that, getting them exposed to different things can break the idea of what, like, success and perfectionism really can look like for them, as we see it as, if it's almost like, and we'll talk a little bit more in a bit about, like, some, like, cognitive tools to be able to use when they get stuck in this perfectionism mindset of, like, well, if I'm not perfect, nothing's worth it. The all or nothing, black or white thinking is really what we're trying to dispel with perfectionism that shows up so much within our school achievement.
Okay, so building off of this idea of connectivity and support networks, we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the power of communication. We know that communication, however that looks, whether that's verbal, nonverbal, whether that's text, email, being able to communicate is vital for not only the human population, but for adolescents who are trying to figure out life as we know it. So let's talk a little bit about that. So when we talk about developing support systems, it's going to require a level of communication, right? We're going to need to be able to talk with one another and figure out what's working and what's not. So obviously we're therapists and we love talking and we love communicating. That's not everyone's strength, and that's okay. But what we have to do is figure out what is some form of communication that we can use to help encourage success for adolescents, whether it is in the school setting, in the home setting, in the community setting. So when we talk about this idea of various support systems generating consistent communication, we talk about who are those support people in the home? How can we encourage communication with your children and parents or siblings or extended support people in the home? I think it's really important to be able to identify who are the people you can go to for certain things, for help, for fun, for support, whatever they may be. And then also, I think maybe not necessarily more importantly, but very importantly, is who are those support people that you can communicate with at school? I think we can all think back to a time in high school, middle school, where we had a specific counselor or a teacher that we really felt like we could go to and talk to about things. And so it's really important to be able to be intentional with adolescents and determining who are the people that you can go to and talk to about some of your challenges. Is that specific teachers, counselors, or even education specialists. So again, as we talk about not only who your young person can go to, but also as parents or as professionals, how can you utilize those same people to help your child be as successful as possible in those settings? So I think it's important for us to acknowledge both what we're communicating and how we're communicating, right? So there's a number of different things that we need to be communicating in everyday life, but we need to be talking about things like schedules, right? Whether that's actually what time you're getting up for school, what time you're getting home, what is our homework schedule looking like? What are chore schedules looking like? How does that play a role in success within school and getting homework done and getting projects done? Do we know that there's sports or after school activities that may impact school homework completion, or bedtime, etc.? So being able to acknowledge what are the strengths and the areas of growth in scheduling as well. We know that we'll talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes, but developing children and teens benefit profusely from having a schedule. They know that consistency and that routine is really, really valuable. We also need to be communicating on both our successes and our challenges. And I say our because parents and professionals, what are the challenges and successes you're experiencing, right? Did you have one of those parent wins where you're like, yes, I did this right. We're seeing some good outcomes, right? But there may also be some challenges. And so we're looking at the challenges that every person in the support system is bringing to the table. And so thinking about what are some challenges that may be happening, whether that's waking up late for school or, finding it hard to have lunch in the cafeteria. Or maybe by the time they get to third period or the end of the school day, they're really struggling and they're feeling really tired or down, and they just want to leave or kind of curl inside themselves. Are there successes like they really love art class, but man, they hate math class, right? Do we know there are certain areas that they really succeed in and other areas that maybe they're going to need more of that support? We also need to talk about how are we communicating in terms of not only the format. I was showing Caitlin earlier this little picture that's on the slide, and it really gave me a chuckle because I think it's a good representation of sometimes how we can communicate. We're on our phones a lot. I know myself, I'm guilty of it too. It's sometimes the easiest way to connect with one another. Caitlin and I, our offices are right next to each other, and sometimes we're texting because it's just easier, right? Sometimes we have to go with what's not as easy, and be able to kind of create new norms within our families and within our community supports to ensure that the communication is effective. So we want to talk about communicating and completing check-ins regularly, being proactive, right? Are we talking about what's problematic? Are we talking about barriers? Are we talking about challenges so that we can prevent a full-blown crisis, right? We're going to have some hard days, we're going to have some hiccups, but can we prevent this from being a full blowout, on a day-to-day basis? It's important to identify everyone's unique communication needs. As I mentioned, everyone might have different ways of learning. Everyone has different ways of communicating. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. And then of having awareness of different communication styles. So again, we talk about how are we setting ourselves up for success by being aware of not only what are we trying to communicate, but how we need to communicate. So in the next slide, we can I'm going to not necessarily go through all of these specifically because the names are kind of self-explanatory, but I like this slide and I like this information. And this is something I might encourage you all to go and do a deeper dive on. They have quizzes, they have little handouts and activities that we encourage families and teens to do to learn about what is your type of communication style. So there's four main communication styles: passive communication, aggressive communication, passive aggressive, and assertive. So ideally, we want to operate in this assertive area of communication where we're not only communicating our needs, but we're respecting the needs of other people, right? If we get too passive, we're foregoing our needs. If we get too aggressive, we're not worrying about the needs of others. And so it's important to find that middle ground. What can be a really cool activity is to sit down and learn about one another's communication styles as a family to figure out where is our communication barrier, right? If mom is really aggressive and she's just really straightforward and hey, we got to get to it, boom, 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 boom. And the child might have a more passive approach, that might be too much and that might lead to shutting down and then an ineffective communication system. So this would be something I would encourage everyone to think about is how do you communicate and how can we use this as a tool to think about change and helping your kids to succeed. Then when we kind of work on this and perfect this in the home, how can we then encourage them to take this to school? How are they then communicating to their educators, to their peers, and getting their needs met as effectively as possible? So a part of communication, as it's probably no surprise to all of us, that conflict can be a component of that. Caitlin mentioned the importance of learning to be comfortable having difficult conversations. And so we wanted to make sure and include this information in here to help also encourage everyone to learn about their conflict management style, right? This goes hand in hand with our communication style. So again, anytime we're operating at any extreme, we're not going to be operating as effective as we can be, right? Our goal is going to be to operate in that collaboration space, right? We want to collaborate. We want to work together to find solutions. We want to work together to overcome barriers. As we can see, compromising is also an important part of this process, right? So in order to work towards collaborating, we're going to have to make some compromises. However, we want to learn not to compromise our values and our safety and our health, but we see that, again, the value of assertiveness as well as cooperation in terms of being able to work through difficult situations. I think a lot of times one of the challenges we see with families is either wanting to just steamroll challenges and problems or just pretending they didn't happen. And the biggest, I think, advice that we could give or suggestion is learning to communicate through these things and using them as learning opportunities as a family.
And before I move on to that next section, even when we're talking about creating those support systems across, like trying to go in, as the therapist, right? We're working a lot with the families, with the schools, with outpatient providers, and we teach our team to really have this mindset of collaboration. Like we all want the best interest of our client, and so even if you're moving into spaces to kind of go to bat for your kid or to manage some of the expectations in their school environment, really going in with that collaboration can help get the support that you need. But sometimes we might be more avoidant or we might just want to go in like guns a-blazing, right? And really having that collaborative mindset can just get things going a little bit further. Okay, awesome. So all of this that we're discussing today, right, is to be able to help our young people to thrive, whether that's in the classroom setting, whether that's at home, trying to get some homework done, trying to care about, maybe their project that they have to get done, trying to get up and go to school. We know sometimes even getting out of bed can do that. And so we really do want to focus on what are some really tangible skills and support that can be utilized on a daily basis for your family or as a clinician as you're trying to teach and work with some of your clientele who maybe are really struggling with this. So we're going to focus on, some distress tolerance, some emotional regulation, some coping ahead skills that we're pulling from DBT or our CBT tracks. But a thing I like to make sure to mention when it comes to coping skills, right, we have to really teach our adolescents that coping skills does not mean you're going to feel better right away. It does not mean it solves the problem for you. You're activating these coping skills in order to slow down so that you can make both a rational or that you can make what we'd call like a wise mind decision, something where your rational brain, your logic, your intelligence is able to come in with your emotions. Like, what are my emotions trying to tell me? What is the logical thing? How can I check the facts to be able to move forward as best as possible? So utilizing coping skills to just kind of slow down and, maybe not let your anxiety win. Anxiety's main goal is to just keep you really small to think you're going to feel better if you don't do anything. If it gets to that point, right? It'll feel better if you just stay in bed. But we know that, that piles on after a while. And so helping coping skills can help kind of moderate the ability to slow down to be able to make the best decision possible. So as we move into coping skills strategies that you could use in school or at home with your kids of various ages, just keeping that in mind. It's really just slow down, not solve a problem. So, right, we know managing all the school responsibilities can be really stressful, as well as navigating peer relationships and teacher relationships and, what is really expected of me. And sometimes that doesn't feel clear. And, the fear that might even come with going into school. There's so many components that go into our young people going into school these days. So wanting to utilize coping skills, identify them and know how to implement them. So, we really want to use distress tolerance skills when we're feeling a little bit more of that impulsivity or we're wanting to escape or avoid a situation, a crisis or a stressful situation. We want to pull on our distress tolerance skills. For emotional regulation, we want to utilize that a little bit more when we're noticing like our mood is going up and down and fluctuating. And maybe it's going really fast and we're not able to catch up with our own emotions. We're not really sure why we are feeling what we're feeling. And then being able to kind of utilize those skills to then move towards into like self-care. What is going to be the best decision for me in this moment, in this present moment right now? Practicing those skills, knowing when to utilize what, when, mood fluctuation is different than a stress response, is different than a crisis, and being able to manage those differently. And then being able to create like a coping skills toolbox, it might be something that they can have in their bag or going in of different fidgets or self-soothe items, maybe something in their five senses, a texture or smell that really helps to calm them down. Maybe it's a sour candy, right? We know that can like really quickly reset your body because you just get so distracted and focused on that. As well as creating, for all of our kids, when they come in, we create a little skills card for them that they take around in their backpack with them to practice throughout the whole day in the building, different grounding techniques or, abilities to stay present and observe when their racing thoughts or their ruminations want to take them out of the space that they're trying to occupy. And then we're going to talk about cope ahead plan as well too. How can we prepare ahead for those situations that we know cause us stress, that we know bring up different emotional experiences, maybe anxiety attacks, maybe just a desire to shut down. How do we cope ahead for those things? Have our tools ready. When we know science class does that because we're scared of this teacher and our grade's bad, or trying out for a sporting event or different things like that. So preparing for future stressful events, identifying those triggers, those stresses, those anxieties, what we're trying to avoid, and practicing specific skills that can manage those situations. One of the things I was thinking about when Caitlin was talking about that previous section with communication is, oftentimes we have to build such rapport with our adolescents. That's kind of a main component. But our adolescents just need to know that we care, and for a therapist, oftentimes our form of care is that we just get to be this objective voice, right? We don't have an emotional connection necessarily to the events of their lives. We're not subjective voices in those. We get to really be these objective parties, and that's how they can know that we care. But as a parent, your collaboration is different. Your care is going to show up differently. And maybe it's vulnerability through these things for you. What are the tools that you use to help with your stress management? How do you cope ahead for stressful events and being able to really share that with your adolescents and letting them know that you care, not just, hey, what are you not doing well at? And let me step in there, but like, where are you also doing really great? Where's the middle ground? Where are you feeling successful versus just having those assumptions when you go into it? So really being able to show that you care, I think a way to do that is being vulnerable about your own coping strategies. Um, and then, we have to practice these. It is not natural right away for these to be our coping skills. We kind of got to this place of, maybe extreme anxiety or depression or self-harming because we didn't have a toolkit. And one time practicing doesn't make it perfect. So we have to keep practicing and finding what works really well for us. And that might evolve as we grow and as we're changing and maturing. We might need to evolve our coping skills as well too. What we needed as a freshman in high school, your child may not need the same things as a senior in high school. So some different cognitive CBT techniques to be able to go through this, right? When maybe your child is experiencing a lot of self-critical thought, racing thoughts, rumination, perfectionism thoughts, right? Is some ways to do that is we call it the 3 C's of cognitive behavioral therapy. You want to catch the original thought, identify what that thought is that came before the emotion, before the anxiety, before the sadness, before the anger. What is that thought that came before that? And then you want to change it, changing the thought to be more accurate, more helpful, more associated with the event itself. Oftentimes, an event could occur and there's a lot of personalization or a lot of self-blame or displacement of blame, right? It's all my parents' fault. It's all the teacher's fault. I have no responsibility in that. We really want to catch those thoughts and know that they create more dysfunction than they are helpful. So we catch them, we change them, and then we check them. What's the proof that this is going to be helpful moving forward? How does this more accurately create a more useful thought? Another example is the Tom skill, right? So you start with that automatic thought. Maybe it's, I'm not good enough. You create the whole opposite thought, like I'm the best person in the entire world, right? And then the idea is really to get to that middle ground thought, and the way I kind of teach this to our kids is the middle ground thought. You want to acknowledge that initial thought, right? We don't just want to go all or nothing, black or white, like negative to positive, right? I want to acknowledge the like, hey, I'm not feeling good enough today. And I'm still trying my best. And I still made it to school. And I just did get an A on that test. What is the proof and the evidence that, yes, maybe that thought is there. You didn't ask for that thought to be there, but how do we not give that thought more power than it needs to control what comes next, right? We want to find that middle thought, acknowledging the initial one, but being able to find proof for the and experience of it. Maybe it's nobody likes me. Well, some people may not like me and some people do like me. And then I make my kids say, well, tell me who are the people that like you. And they have to make the list of it, right? And that's just proof that, our automatic negative thoughts or our self-critical thoughts are not always the most valid. And then some other CBT techniques, relaxation, mindfulness, journaling, desensitization, setting goals, SMART goals, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. That's a really helpful thing with school assignments or, being present more often than absent, really setting those manageable, SMART goals for that. Creating reward systems or incentives to produce engagement, and looking through some of those cognitive distortions. These are some additional distress tolerance or skills that you can use. Again, these are kind of more so when we're wanting to be impulsive, we're wanting to escape something, we're wanting to avoid something. You can utilize TIP. Again, these are a lot of acronyms. TIP, accepts, and improve are all these acronyms, and every letter means something. That's what therapists love. But it does kind of help and can be an easy tool and way to remember things. So TIP being, you want to change your temperature, maybe do some intense exercise, work on some paced breathing or progressive muscle relaxation, gaining back the control and the groundedness of your body. Working through Wise Mind Accepts. This is ways to accept some of that distress that maybe we don't feel like we have a lot of control over. School can just be that. The environment itself can just produce distress, but where do we gain control again? Looking at these different factors, the activities we can do, how can we contribute in a situation, comparison to a past self, as opposed to your current self or your future self. Labeling your emotions. What else is really coming up besides just distress? Pushing away thoughts and then sensations as well too. And then finally, the improved skill. So taking some time to imagine, utilizing a guided meditation, visualizing things. Oftentimes I will do this in the form of like a container exercise. I'll make my kids pick their favorite vacation, and then we're going to put a beautiful box in that place with all of the things that they know they can get back to, right? But right now it's not serving them, but we do want to look back at those things again. Finding meaning. What are we learning? I asked them to teach me something they learned from group. Maybe pausing, praying, meditating, taking some time to relax, doing one thing mindfully. How can I really pay attention to this writing prompt I'm doing or the school activity that I'm doing? We say take a little vacation. This might be like a 15-minute break from a school. Maybe this is when they're doing homework back at home and they just need a 15-minute break, but getting back to it. Sometimes they may need incentives to get back to it, and being consistent with those things, with the incentives and the as well as the consequences, just being consistent with that. And then encouragement. What does positive self-talk look like? Put the sticky notes on the mirror, have them in your binder or your notebook. And then finally, for a coping skill or a thing to help manage some of the distress that your clients or children might be experiencing when it's coming to school and managing all the expectations, is a cope ahead plan. This is really being able to mentally rehearse some more like effective ways to keep going, abilities to stay active in difficult situations. And you make these ahead of time. Obviously, Cope Ahead kind of says that, but you make these for future events, like a test that's coming up or a presentation you may have to give at school that you want to avoid really bad. So think through the problem, check the facts on it, detail it out, everything you're going to feel, everything that you might be, how you might behave, plan the response, detail how you're going to cope with this. Maybe it's closing your eyes or asking the teacher if you can look a different direction while giving this presentation. And then also, what are those skills you can use from your toolbox that we talked about earlier? And then you're going to take time to imagine the whole situation, play it out in your mind, really visualize it, visualize the success, visualize it going well, visualize, maybe that kid who always makes fun of you is absent that day, whatever it is that's going to make, the preparation for that thing something they feel capable of doing as opposed to having to avoid. And then taking some time to purposely engage in a relaxation activity after you've gone through the stressful experience.
Okay, awesome. So Caitlin has talked about a lot of great skills, a lot of great strategies that we can encourage our young people and adolescents to use not only in school situations, but in general stressful, frustrating life situations. The thing we have to realize is that we need routine and structure. And so that's what we're going to spend the last little bit of time talking about, is the importance of routine and structure. So let's jump into that. So from a developmental standpoint, children, they need consistency and they need structure for success. So when we talk about this idea of a growing brain, we talk about the growing body, having consistency, having structure helps kids to feel safe, helps them to know what to expect, and is going to help them to just generally feel more in control from day to day and have better outcomes. So what is consistency? So consistency looks at familiarity, regular expectations, right? So not moving the goalpost. Your kid is going to know that they have to do their homework for 30 minutes every day before they can get their computer time. It's not switching it to, well, actually today you need to do an hour, right? So consistency is going to create some regular expectations that your child knows what to engage in and when to engage in it, which is going to help them to be more likely to engage, increase motivation, and increase their success in that situation. Structure is also really important, right? When we talk about rules, limits, and boundaries, it's vital in terms of helping a young person to develop as effectively as possible. Obviously, kids are not going to love to hear that, right? They're not going to want to be super excited about this idea of having all these rules and limits and boundaries. However, those are things that we can talk about and establish together. So, going back to our discussion about communication, how can we sit down and establish our family rules, right? How can we establish the Monday through Friday expectations and rules that we have as a family, and then maybe some things that we do on the weekend? Parents being able to confidently communicate that there are going to be certain limits and there's going to be certain boundaries, especially when we talk about the consistency of weeknight routines, right? So being able to, again, communicate that. We don't want to have any sense of mystery when it comes to the expectations, the rules, limits, or the boundaries, because again, that just creates an air of confusion, potential anxiety, and that is not going to encourage success. So as we talk about this idea of repetition, even thinking about what Caitlin said too about practicing skills, practice makes perfect. Trial and error is the name of the game sometimes, right? We have to figure out what's going to work and we have to repeat it over and over. So a lot of these things that we're encouraging you all to implement, to try out, it's going to take some time, right? It isn't going to be a one and done. It is going to be something that's going to take time. Change is uncomfortable, but that is where discomfort is where the best change comes from. So when we think about this idea of rewards and consequences, we also want to think about how we're reinforcing those rules and limits that we are reinforcing as a family. So when we talk about tools for success for students and this idea of structure and routine, having a homework routine, right? Encouraging young people to do their homework in the same place at the same time, setting a timer. We have timers for every kid in our learning lab at our program to encourage them to do the amount of time that they feel confident that they can be successful at. And then creating goals for that period of time, right? If we say, hey, we need to work on schoolwork for 30 minutes, encouraging them to set at least one goal. Maybe they're not writing a 10-page essay, but maybe they're finishing their math questions from the workbook that they have to do. We want to encourage taking breaks and as well to encourage this idea that we don't have to do a marathon. We can do small little breaks. We also want to encourage daily versus weekly goals, right? Is there something we want to get done today, or is there something that we can maybe achieve over a week-long period? And then when we talk about this idea of collaboration and support, it's really valuable to talk about checking homework and providing help where needed. I always tell people I could not teach a young person math today because they learn it in such a different way than we're used to. However, can I sit down and show that support and that concern and then learn about maybe some of their areas of deficits or barriers that we do need to connect them with additional resources on? So again, these things are really connecting all together. We just need to make sure we identify again, what are those tools to help my young person succeed? So again, small actions every day are much more powerful than marathon sessions once a week. We want to show up every single day, no matter what. That's both encouraging our young people and adolescents to show up every day, but us as parents, professionals, support people, how can we show up every day to engage in that consistency, to engage in that structure with adolescents to help them succeed as best as possible? And then finally, talking about rewards and consequences, this is probably one of the biggest areas of conversation we have with families sometimes is like nothing matters to them. They don't care. They don't want rewards. They're not worried about consequences. However, it's important to sit down again and how can we continue to have this conversation, doing some trial and error. How does school success translate at home? If they're doing things well at home that they like, how does that translate back to school? What motivates your child to engage and succeed? Is it their phone? Is it time with friends? Is it a specific game that's coming out in a week or so? Every one of your children may have different incentives. We also need to be mindful of how we're reinforcing positive behavior and not utilizing punishment as the only force of reinforcement within this process. And again, just getting really creative can be really fun, and figuring that out with your kid and being very intentional to talk about it can also just be a really cool process. Is this my slide?
I don't remember.
Okay. That's all right. So this is kind of our final slide. We've talked about a lot of different things. We want to recognize that the work you all do as parents, as professionals, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort. And we understand it can be exhausting and it can feel really defeating sometimes. However, the extra work, the time, the commitment, all that consistency and structure we're talking about, it does pay off. Change takes time. We have to practice grace within ourselves and within our family system, and that small changes will lead to big outcomes. The biggest thing we can remember is that consistency is key, making sure that we're not moving that goalpost, and that individual needs and plans will have a greater success when we work on them together and continuing to check in on how success is going. So we believe in you guys. You can do it, and it's just one step at a time.
The one thing I wanted to mention too, I think that was my slide. Sorry, Caitlin. Going back to this tools for success as well too, and routines. One thing that we talk a lot with our kids about as well is sleep hygiene. They should not be doing their homework in bed. I would make that a very clear, like having a space for that, not doing that in bed, so that they know that their body and their brain knows, like when they get into their bed, that's a time for rest. And that is what that space is for, to be able to help them with their sleep.